So the heading for my thought today is, what's good about eating meat? And the short answer is nothing. Meat has very low nutritional value, consisting mainly of protein. Turns out that protein is actually bad protein, contrary to what we were all brought up with. Meat has saturated fat, it has cholesterol, it has heme iron, or the iron that comes with blood. So, what is meat? And, we don't really think about this because meat is so much part of what we grow up with. Meat is a given. We think about it as that it's just a natural thing to do for us to eat meat. And if we don't eat meat, we're not going to be healthy. We're not going to be strong, But basically, the meat is the muscle of a once living animal, and that animal had a life. It had feelings. It had experiences. It had relationships, just like us. But most importantly, the most important thing to that animal is continuing to live, continuing to take its next breath, just like us. As I've said before, though, I ate meat for over 40 years and didn't give a second thought. Even when I became vegetarian, which is towards the latter period of that time, I ate kangaroo meat for environmental reasons. Didn't eat other meat, but I ate kangaroo meat because I believed that somehow it was better for the environment. And you could argue that in some ways that the kangaroo meat is better for the environment. Soft feed, not breaking up the soil, not drinking, not consuming anywhere near so much water, not degrading the vegetation. But bottom line, by eating kangaroo, I was supporting a very cruel industry, an industry where animals are killed cruelly because they're not always shot in the head exactly as required. The joeys have their heads smashed against the ground, a rock, a car, whatever. You just do the best you can at the time you are in life. I've been lucky enough to have my eyes opened to the cruelty involved in eating meat, the degradation of the environment involved in eating meat, the degradation of my own body involved in eating meat, and the contribution that meat makes to global warming, which is the biggest threat to the future of life on this planet. And this planet is, as far as we know, the only planet in the universe, apparently the ever-expanding universe, that has life on it. Which, if you think about it for even just a second, is an absolute miracle. So we should do everything we can within our power to ensure that life continues on this planet. And one thing, we all feel very powerless these days because the world seems to be increasingly crazy. But one thing we have complete control over is what we put in our mouth. And unwittingly or knowingly, while we're putting meat in our mouth, we are contributing to the demise of the planet. Unquestioning. There's no question about that if you look at it objectively. So why do we eat meat? Well, basically it's because it's our tradition, it's what we grew up with. And as part of that, we were told a lot of misinformation, basically lies, about the value of meat, and along with that, the value of dairy. So everyone knows, you've got to have animal protein, you've got to have calcium, you've got to have milk for calcium, and you've got to have iron, which comes from red meat. Without those things, you're just going to keel over. Well, even when I became a vegan, I was really concerned about the amount of protein that I was going to get, and it took me a while to sort of to realise that you don't have to think about protein, just eat plants. Some of the strongest and biggest animals on the planet don't eat meat. Elephants, gorillas. And you know, the humans, you can watch Game Changers, which is a great documentary, which is about elite sports people who don't eat meat and who are excelling in their particular sport. So, there's no requirement to eat meat to be healthy. In fact, all the evidence is that, if you eat a whole food plant-based diet, you have a greater chance, a much better chance of being healthy and living longer. Ironically, Julie, my wife, had a referral to a specialist, and there was a warning on that, on the referral, which said vegan. And, we were laughing and saying, well, it really should be, all the omnivores out there should have a warning on their referral saying that these people are at risk of all the chronic diseases that we have in the West, and, diabetes, heart attack, stroke, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity, arthritis, dementia, the list just goes on. Our life expectancy has plateaued, and it will go down in the future if people don't make a change. In America, life expectancy is already dropping. Okay, so the biggest myth about meat is that we need animal protein. That animal protein is superior in some way, and many people believe this, that the balance of amino acids in animal protein is the best balance available. There are certain amino acids that we have to get from our food. We can't create ourselves. It turns out that the balance of amino acids is actually unhelpful in meat. So there's two amino acids in particular, methionine and leucine, which are high in meat and which are associated with causing cancer. The whole idea of, complete protein we used to have, and incomplete protein is nonsense. Every thing that has a structure has protein in it. And they all have all the proteins. All of the proteins. There are no protein. There are all of the amino acids. There are no amino acids missing in any plant material. It's just a question of what are the percentages of amino acids. But if you just eat, you're going to get all the amino acids. When we eat food, it's not transferred holus bolus into our bloodstream. It's broken down. The protein in that food is broken down in your stomach into the constituent amino acids. And the body has complete wisdom. The body knows it never makes a mistake. It is always doing its best for you. Given the circumstances, given the hand that has been dealt. And we can deal a really good hand by by taking the meat out of our diet and eating whole food, vegan food. But the important thing to remember about when we eat food, we're not eating, as Colin T. Campbell says, we're not eating individual nutrients when we're eating. We're eating food, and food is made up of many things, and all those things work together in a synergistic kind of way. They all complement each other, and what we try and do is isolate and say, well, is it cholesterol that's the problem, or is it saturated fat that's the problem, or is it this magic ingredient, chemical here, and we can replicate that, and we can isolate it, make a drug, and we can sell it. This whole supplements thing is a complete and utter rip-off, and over again, supplements have been proven to cause you ill health. All you need to do is just eat a whole food vegan diet, and you've got all of the nutrients that you need, and your body will take out of that diet what you require. So food's a package deal. When you're eating, you can't just eat animal protein. When you eat animal protein, you're eating a whole bunch of other things. And so what are you eating? Well, you're eating cholesterol. You're eating saturated fat. You're not eating any fiber. You're eating a food that's low in antioxidants compared to plants. You're eating food that promotes inflammation. Now, it turns out that most people have chronic low-level inflammation in their body at all times. And inflammation is the sort of base cause of most of our chronic diseases that we have in the Western world. So you look at any disease you want to name, a base low-level chronic inflammation is as part of the root cause of that disease. And so we want to aim for a situation where our inflammation levels are at the lowest possible. And it comes back to a whole food, plant-based or vegan diet. So, so meat's got cholesterol. How much cholesterol do we need to take in? 0. We don't need any cholesterol. Our body makes cholesterol, all the cholesterol we need. When you eat meat, you're eating cholesterol, but on top of that, you're slowing up your digestion. So not only are you eating this cholesterol, but as your body tries to get rid of that cholesterol, it stays within your digestive tract longer and then becomes reabsorbed. When you eat a whole food vegan diet, the time from your mouth to the other end is about 15 or 16 hours tops. When you eat meat, you're talking 2 to 3 days. And in that extra day or two, that's when toxic things that your body is trying to get rid of become reabsorbed in that slow passage. So that's another reason why eating meat is not helpful for you. Eating meat also has saturated fat. Cholesterol, plants have 0 cholesterol. Plants have very, very low saturated fat, and meat is high in saturated fat. And the more saturated fat you have, the higher your cholesterol goes. And why is cholesterol so important? Well, because cholesterol is implicated in heart attacks, strokes, and all of the diseases of your blood vessel. Because, when you have a heart attack, what happens is that the endothelial lining of your blood vessel has become supersaturated with cholesterol, and it bursts. And when it bursts, it forms a clot in your aorta or in your artery, which blocks the blood from getting through and causes a heart attack. Now, if your cholesterol is below 3.87, it's not impossible to have a heart attack, but it's extremely unlikely that you'll have a heart attack. And I'm pretty confident you won't get there unless you eat a whole food vegan diet. And the thing about saturated fat as well is that there's a saying: the fat you eat is the fat you wear. And people who are obese have 3 to 4 times higher rate of hospitalisation than people who are at a normal weight. And we know within Australia that we have about 70% of the population that are overweight, about 30-odd% of the population that are so overweight they're in the obese category. And they're putting themselves at tremendous risk of ongoing chronic disease or sudden demise. Now, the other thing about meat is that you need different bacteria in your gut to break down meat than what you do when you break down plants. So, and that is crucial when it comes to your risk of a heart attack, because only 4 or 5 years ago, it could be longer as I'm getting old, but it's recent. They discovered this substance called TMAO, which is produced by the bacteria which breaks down meat, and that chemical is essential to in the process of laying down cholesterol in the lining of your blood vessels. Without that chemical, you can't lay down cholesterol in your blood vessels. Now, if you eat plants, if you have a vegan diet, you have a completely different suite of bacteria. So if for some reason they've done this experiment, they give people who are vegan a piece of meat and they produce no TMAO because they haven't got any bacteria to produce that TMAO. So looking after the bacteria that are in your gut is crucial to your health. And you've probably heard people talking about this a lot. It's a very, very popular field of research at the moment. But what do good bacteria like? They like fibre. And where does fibre come from? Only one place, plants. And it turns out that every plant has its own kind of fibre, and that every kind of fibre has its own bacteria that eats it. So the more plants, the more diversity of plants you eat, the greater diversity of bacteria you've got in your bowel. And basically, more is better. Where if you're eating meat, you're getting the wrong sort of bacteria. The bacteria that feed on fibre, insoluble fibre from plants, produce short-chain fatty acids which reduce inflammation. As I talked before, inflammation is something you don't want. Chronic inflammation, low-level inflammation, is something you don't want. You only want inflammation in an acute situation when you've got an infection or something like that. So, iron, of course, is the other big thing. Well, it turns out that, people who eat meat can be low in iron, and the same goes for B12. I'll just mention that as well. People who eat meat can be low in B12. So, it's there's nothing magical about eating meat which is going to solve that problem, even though people will tell you that. The iron in meat can actually be dangerous, because that iron comes from blood, and you can lead to over concentrations. But whatever, there's plenty of iron in plants, leafy greens, for example. And B12, well, for B12, if you're not eating meat, you need to take a tablet or eat B12 fortified foods. It's not that the animal's making B12, the animal's just getting it from the ground and the grass. In fact, lots of animals that people are eating these days, because they're living in antiseptic conditions, just like we live in these antiseptic conditions, actually have B12 injections. Just cut out the middleman, The other downside about meat is that it promotes insulin growth factor 1. So insulin growth factor 1 promotes growth, which is all well and good, when you're a child. But when you're an adult, you don't want growth. And so IGF-1 is heavily associated with, cancer, promotes cancer. Now, you may or may not have heard that processed meat is a class 1 carcinogen. Now, what does that mean? The class 1 carcinogen, this is the World Health Organization's ruling. And there was actually an Australian scientist who was on that expert advisory panel which came up with this classification. So a class 1 carcinogen means that substance causes cancer. No ifs, buts, maybes, or whatever. That doesn't mean to say that everyone who eats processed meat is going to get cancer, but this does cause cancer. It's just like smoking. Not everyone who smokes ends up with lung cancer, but it is accepted and known that smoking is also a class 1 carcinogen. Tobacco is a class 1. Smoking tobacco is a class 1 carcinogen. Same category as meat. Processed meat causes cancer. So what is processed meat? Well, processed meat is like bacon, sausages, metwurst, frites, ham, beef, sliced chicken, all those things. They're all processed meats. And red meat is a class 2 carcinogen. And class 2 carcinogen is something which probably causes cancer. So the jury's still out, but it's thought that it probably causes cancer. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if you haven't heard about these two things. I mean, this came out maybe 3-4 years ago, but no one's the government hasn't come out and told you. I mean, they're really good telling you not to smoke, right? But they haven't come out and tell you not to eat processed meat. Now, I wonder why that is. Well, I don't think it's too hard to work out. It's because the government requires the support of the National Party to get elected, even though the Greens get more votes than the National Party in the lower house. The National Party has 8 or 9 seats and the Greens have 1 or 2. I'm out of date with what's going on right now, but that's because the votes are concentrated in certain places in Australia, and the government wants to get elected. So it's quite happy to sacrifice our health on the cause of being elected. That's why you won't hear about processed meat being a class 1 carcinogen or red meat being a class 2 carcinogen. What are the other downsides of meat? Well, look, it's kind of almost endless. There are a thing called heterocyclic amines, which are produced when you fry or grill meat, and they are carcinogenic. Meat has trans fat, the recommended intake of trans fat, and that causes blockages in your arteries. The recommended intake of trans fat is 0, so that means 0 meat. So plants have 0 trans fat, and of course animals transmit diseases, and we're well aware of that just at the moment with this coronavirus outbreak. But there are many other kinds of diseases, and because we're animals, we're prone to getting those diseases. Meat at many places, including within Australia, has been bought from supermarkets and then tested, and has tested positive for E. coli, which is the bacteria which causes diarrhea, and MRSA, which is a superbug, meaning that it's resistant to antibiotics. So this is the meat that you're going to the supermarket and buying. So meat is a dangerous product because we're meat. That's why. So the other issue is that the future at the moment of the planet is severely at risk, and animal agriculture is a significant contributor to global warming. Like the UN says, global warming, the contribution of animal agriculture is 15%. Now, there's a lot of debate about that figure. I mean, the World Watch Institute says it's 51%. There's a guy called Sailesh Rao who says it's 87%. And you can see there's a huge gap between these figures. But, whatever figure you want to think about, even if you just go for the 15%, that is more than the contribution of all of the transport worldwide, which is 14%. And strangely enough, the environmental groups seem to refuse to speak about the contribution of animal agriculture to global warming. I suspect because they like to eat steak. There's lots of information on the web about this. If you wanted to look up information about animal agriculture contribution to global warming, then I'd look up a guy called Sailash Rao, SailashRao, where he talks a lot about how the estimates come by. But animal agriculture contributes because of methane. That's largely the biggest contributor, and methane is, I think, 38 times more global warming than carbon dioxide. But there are many other negative contributions of animal agriculture. One is water use. It takes a huge amount of water to produce, a pound of mince or a piece of steak, compared to producing the same amount of food value in plants. With animals, there's a huge amount of land degradation as a result of producing animals. I mean, the one that people know about most of all is cutting down the Amazon rainforest to, run cattle on it, or to grow soybeans to export to the United States to feed cattle, so that people can have, marbled steaks instead of non-marbled steaks. But you can just drive along the road anywhere in the rangelands, and if there's a fence, you can see the difference between inside the fence and outside the fence, where the cattle are or where the sheep are. I mean, if those sheep and cattle were removed from that area, then a lot more carbon would be stored in that area of land than what's stored now. So that's one immediate effect of removing the animals, is that carbon dioxide is taken out of the atmosphere and stored in the plants that are not being eaten and degraded. And of course, on top of that, eating meat is cruel. Even the most humane eating of meat is cruel. But most meat production is extremely cruel, with factory farms, of course, being the worst of these. If you're interested in seeing what happens on Australian farms and Australian slaughterhouses, watch Dominion. The great thing about this is that this is all Australian footage. And people always go, oh, it wouldn't happen here. That's not how we treat animals here. We have standards here. Well, just have a look at the footage and you'll see the truth of what actually goes on in Australian slaughterhouses and on Australian factory farms. And the government and the farmers don't want you to know what happens on farms. That is why there have been attempts to legislate it as a terrorist act to show you what happens on farms and slaughterhouses. It is the same as what the government has done in relation to refugees. The powerless are hidden from sight and therefore can be made to cease to exist. There is a bit of a problem in that the death trucks still drive down the road through the abattoirs, and the meat keeps turning up in the supermarket and on people's plates. So it's a bit of a giveaway that there were animals and that maybe they weren't treated so well. Even though the abattoirs are out of sight, somewhere there is realization that cruelty and slaughter is going on. So what's good about eating meat? Nothing. What's good about eating plants being vegan? Everything. Because it's good for you, it's good for the animals, and it's good for the planet. It has a real triple bottom line. Thank you.